Shalom. This week we're reading in the Sefer Shemot, the book of Exodus, Parashat B'shalach, beginning in Exodus chapter 13 and verse 17. And there are many important themes this week's Torah portion. One of the most central themes, of course, is the magnificent Song of the Sea, Az Yasher Moshe, the story of perhaps the greatest miracle of all, the splitting of the sea, the Jewish people walking through the sea on dry land, and God, of course, hardening Paro's hearts and pursuing after them, and the sanctification of the name of God through the salvation of Israel at the sea and the drowning of Egypt. And it would really take so long, it would take forever, for us to discuss all of the dimensions and all of the ramifications of this beautiful song, the Song of the Sea. There are so many different ways of understanding every single word there. It's one of the most incredible experiences to really learn this section of the Torah in depth and to understand the great miracle of the splitting of the sea and the implications that it has in every generation. And of course, in terms of galvanizing Israel's faith, we read in chapter 14 and verse 30, on the day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptian, and Israel saw the Egyptians dying on the seashore, and Israel saw the great hand which the Lord had used upon the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in Moses his servant. So we read all about the magnificent event of the splitting of the sea. But it wasn't so simple as the verses indicate. Of course, when we have the amplification of the rich tradition, of the oral tradition, we understand a lot of what is going on between the lines, and there are very, very deep lessons that our sages communicate to us for every generation regarding perhaps some of the greatest secrets of the Torah. And I'd like to focus on one particular aspect of the splitting of the sea that I think has in it lessons that are incredibly actual and that ring true for the situation perhaps that we find ourselves in today in an almost uncanny manner. So the Midrash tells us that when our forefathers arrived at the sea and they were being pursued by the Egyptians, and of course we read in the verses how Moses was praying to God, basically, and Hashem said to him, "Why do you cry out to me? Speak to the children of Israel and go." And we understand that eventually, we've learned previously that it was one man, Nachshon, the son of Aminadav, the prince of the tribe of Judah, that began to walk in, and all of the people walked in after him. But here is a different account from the Midrash that sheds a little bit of light on the mindset of the people at the time. The Midrash tells us that when the Jewish people arrived at the sea, they were basically divided into four different categories. They were made up of four different groups. One of the groups said, "Let us throw ourselves into the sea." They were suicidal. They wanted to make a last stand, and they were without hope. And they just said, "Let's end it right here." Another group said, "Let's go back to Egypt." Another group said, "Let's wage war against them." And another group said, "Let us scream out. Let us protest against them." So these were the four basic categories of the divisions or the parties, the factions of the people of Israel on the sea. Let's drown ourselves, let's throw ourselves into the water. Another said, let's just go back to Egypt and just admit that it's over, and we'll just give ourselves over to them again in slavery. Another group said, let's wage war against them, and another said, let's scream out. And each one of these four categories actually was addressed by Moses in his response to them. When we read in chapter 14, we read in verse 13, Moshe said to the people, "Don't be afraid. Stand firm and see Hashem's salvation that he will wreak for you today. For the way you have seen the Egyptians is only today, but you shall no longer continue to see them, for eternity. And then verse 14 continues, Hashem, the Lord will fight for you, but you shall remain silent. So the Midrash tells us a very beautiful thing. It says each part of these verses was a response to one of these groups. For example, the group that said, let's just throw ourselves into the water. So to them, Moshe said, stand firm. Stand right here. Don't throw yourselves into the water. Stand firm and see the salvation of Hashem. To the group who said, let's go back to Egypt, Moshe said, no, because this that you see, the Egyptians, is only today. You're never going to see them again. To the group that said, let's wage war against them, Moshe said, the Lord will fight for you. And to the group who said, let's scream out against them, let's stand and protest, Moshe said, you shall remain silent. Looking at the situation today of the children of Israel, the inheritors of the legacy of our forefathers who stood at the sea and who were so confounded by the reality of their situation and who perhaps perceived it as an existential dilemma and a crisis in the world of realpolitik. They were divided into these groups, and one said, what's the use? We can't win. The other said, and let's just kill ourselves. The other said, you know what? They're stronger than us. We made a mistake leaving. Let's go back to Egypt where at least our lives were miserable, but at least we were alive. Another group said, no, we can fight them. And another group said, no, we have to protest. And you know what? It's really the same thing today. When we're confronted with those powers that would usurp our rights to the land of Israel, that would foist upon us an alien agenda which is not the agenda of the Holy One, blessed be He, and the Torah for our destiny as the people that are supposed to bring the divine presence in the world. And so some of us are saying, what's the use? We're just so exhausted. Let's just throw ourselves into the sea. Some are saying, let us subjugate ourselves to the nations because we can't win. Others are saying, let's fight. And others are saying, let's protest. And it's really the same thing. That's why I think this is so true, the dissection really of how people react under these circumstances. And I think the lesson of our sages is really very clear. These reactions are legitimate and really perfectly normal, and you can see that they are kind of set in the mindset of our people from time immemorial, from the moment of the greatest miracle of all, the birth, as it were, of the Jewish people, the exodus from Egypt, crossing the sea. But in the end, it was God Himself who showed His might and His power. It wasn't our people, it wasn't our fights, it wasn't our protest. We didn't have to go back to Egypt, we didn't throw ourselves into the sea. It wasn't even our prayers, because God said, why do you cry out to me? Speak to the children of Israel and go. All you have to do is put in that minimum of effort to take the step forward and know that it's Hashem who's going to be waging the battle, and it's Hashem who's going to accompany us through that proverbial sea, the sea that we're in right now as well. And the one who brought us through the sea on dry land has not abandoned us. And so we look at the situation that we're in today, and we're divided against ourselves into these different groups. We have to remember that ultimately it is the will of Hashem that we march forward through that sea on dry land to the other side, into the promised land, to take our role to bring redemption to the whole world. Nothing can stop that. It's Hashem's promise. And so while we might be small-minded, while we might be oppressed or overwhelmed by the situation, let's look at this week's Parsha. Let's look at what happened at the sea and realize that ultimately Hashem Himself shines forth, that God of vengeance, that God of purpose, and He is the one who brings us through the sea on dry land to the other side to begin the next chapter, which is the chapter of redemption for Israel and for all of humanity.